My parents skipped my wedding because I married before my perfect sister. Now their perfect family dynasty is falling apart and I am happy. I don't think my parents ever meant to make me feel invisible. It wasn't as if they outright ignored me, but the way they looked at my younger sister Meline made it clear that I would always be second best. Maybe even third, if they had another daughter. I remember one summer when I was 10 years old. I had just won first place in a school-wide poetry contest. I spent days perfecting every word, carefully crafting each line until it felt just right. When I got home with my certificate, my heart pounded with excitement as I ran to my parents, holding it up like a golden trophy. Mom, Dad, look what I won. My mother barely glanced up from the magazine she was reading on the couch. What is it? A poetry contest. I won first place. I said, breathless, waiting for the smile, the pride, the hug, anything. She nodded absent-mindedly, flipping a page. That's nice, Rebecca. Meline, did you show me that new pose you learned in ballet? Meline, who had been sitting across the room stretching her legs into a perfect split, beamed and shot up to perform a flawless pirouette. Beautiful, sweetheart. My mom gushed, clapping. My dad even looked up from his laptop to nod in approval. I was still standing there, my certificate crinkling in my tight grip. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile, and placed it on the kitchen counter. That was the moment I started to understand how things worked in our family. Meline was the golden child and I was something else. She was effortlessly graceful, talented in everything she touched. She won every school competition, landed modeling gigs before she even finished high school, and had a natural ability to charm people. She wasn't just beautiful. She had this magnetic presence that made people want to be around her. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, bookish one. I preferred programming over parties, reading over recitals. My world was filled with algorithms and logic, while hers was magazine covers and dance recitals. And my parents? Well, they had a favorite, whether they admitted it or not. When Meline got her first modeling contract at 16, my parents threw a huge party, inviting family and friends to celebrate. They framed her first headshot and hung it above the fireplace like a shrine. The same year, I got accepted into a summer coding program for gifted students. My mom's response? That's nice, dear. But don't you think you should focus on something more social? It became a pattern. No matter what I did, it was never enough. At first I tried. I really did. I joined clubs they suggested, dressed the way my mom wanted, even attempted modeling for a brief and humiliating moment. But I was never Meline, and I never would be. By the time I was in my 20s, I stopped trying to impress them. That's when things actually got better. I found a job I loved as a software developer. I made friends who appreciated me for who I was, not who I was supposed to be. And most importantly, I learned to distance myself emotionally from the expectations that had weighed me down for years. At family gatherings, I played my part. I smiled, nodded while they gushed about Meline's latest achievements, and kept my distance. It was easier that way. And then I met my husband. I met my husband, Daniel, at a tech conference when I was 27. It wasn't a romantic, love-at-first-sight kind of moment. No violins played. No sparks flew in slow motion. It was just easy. I was standing near the refreshment table, balancing a cup of coffee in one hand and my phone in the other, when someone bumped into me, nearly making me spill my drink. Whoa, sorry about that. I looked up to see a tall guy with dark, slightly messy hair and a warm, apologetic smile. He wore a conference badge like mine, but his was flipped backward, making his name unreadable. No worries, I said, steadying my cup. He glanced at my badge. Rebecca. Nice to meet you. Are you enjoying the conference? I shrugged. It's interesting. Some of the talks are a little too. Look at how great my startup is, but the AI panel was pretty good. He grinned. Agreed. I sat through one where a guy spent 20 minutes bragging about how his app detects bad vibes in a room. Like, what does that even mean? I laughed. Did he at least have an algorithm for that, or was it just a fancy mood ring? That's the real question, isn't it? He said, eyes crinkling in amusement. I'm Daniel, by the way. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not as someone's sister, not as the family's afterthought. Just me. Daniel and I hit it off instantly. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, from coding and sci-fi movies to late-night debates about the best pizza toppings. Unlike my parents, who were obsessed with appearances, he never made me feel like I had to change. He loved my dry sense of humor, my analytical mind, my awkwardness. When we started dating, I kept waiting for the moment when he'd say something about how I should be more like Meline. Dress more stylishly, lose weight, be more social. But he never did. Instead, he told me I was beautiful. That my intelligence was one of the things he admired most about me. And for the first time I started to believe it. When Daniel proposed 4 years later, it was simple and perfect. Just the two of us on the couch, eating takeout, with an old sitcom playing in the background. I didn't hesitate to say yes. But when I told my parents, their reaction was underwhelming. I expected surprise. Maybe even some mild enthusiasm. Instead, there was silence. Then my mother sighed. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Rebecca? Marriage is a big commitment." "Yes, Mom," I said, forcing a smile. "That's kind of the point." She pursed her lips, clearly unimpressed. "Well, I suppose we'll see." My father barely acknowledged it, just nodding before returning to his laptop. I was stunned. No congratulations. No excitement. Nothing. That night, Daniel noticed my mood. "They weren't happy for you, were they?" I exhaled, staring at my untouched dinner. "It's not that they're unhappy. They just don't care. Not like they would if it were Meline." Daniel reached for my hand. "That's their loss." I wanted to believe him. But deep down, I still wanted them to care. A month after our engagement, Daniel's family threw us a small party to celebrate. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a cozy gathering at his parents' house with good food, close friends, and lots of laughter. His mom, Linda, was the kind of woman who made everyone feel like family within minutes of meeting them. She hugged me like I was already her daughter and gushed about how excited she was for the wedding. "I always wanted a daughter," she said warmly, squeezing my hands. "And now I finally get one." I swallowed the lump in my throat. It was the kind of affection I had never received from my own mother. Speaking of my mother, she and my father weren't there. I had invited them, of course. I sent multiple messages, followed up with phone calls, even asked Meline to remind them. The response was always the same: "We'll see if we can make it." They never did. I checked my phone throughout the evening, hoping for a message, an apology, something. But there was nothing. When Daniel's dad raised a toast to us, I forced myself to smile, pretending I wasn't thinking about the 2 empty seats that were supposed to be filled by my parents. Later that night, I finally caved and called my mom. "Oh, Rebecca," she said, sounding almost bored. "We got busy with some things. You know how it is." "Busy? Busy with what?" She didn't say, and honestly, I didn't even ask. Because I already knew the answer. After the party, I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. Maybe they were just bad at expressing excitement. Maybe I was overthinking it. But as wedding planning continued, their disinterest became impossible to ignore. I asked my mom to go dress shopping with me. She suddenly had prior commitments. I tried to talk to my dad about venues. He barely looked up from his laptop. Even when we set a date and sent out invitations, they didn't RSVP. Still, I made sure they got their invitations. I sent digital ones too, just to be safe. The online system even showed me the read receipts. They had seen them. They just didn't care. One evening, as Daniel and I were finalizing the seating chart, he glanced at me hesitantly. "I don't want to upset you," he started. "But I overheard something at the engagement party. Your parents were talking to Meline on the phone. She was crying." I froze. "What?" I didn't catch everything, but they said something like, "This wasn't the plan," and "We never thought Rebecca would get married first." A strange numbness spread through my chest. They weren't just uninterested in my wedding. They were upset that it was happening before Meline's. I should have been surprised, but deep down, I wasn't. The morning of my wedding was a blur of excitement and nerves. My bridesmaids buzzed around me, adjusting my dress, fixing my hair, making sure everything was perfect. Everything felt surreal. Except for the empty space in my heart where my parents should have been. I had held onto a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, they would change their minds. That they would show up at the last minute, walking into the venue with an apologetic smile, telling me they wouldn't miss their daughter's big day for the world. But as I stood at the altar, scanning the crowd, I knew the truth. They weren't coming. I didn't cry. Not then. Not when Daniel squeezed my hands, looking at me with nothing but love. Not when his mother, Linda, dabbed at her eyes proudly as we exchanged vows. I refused to let their absence ruin this moment. But later, when I saw the 2 empty chairs in the front row, the ones that were meant for them, something inside me cracked. After the wedding, I told myself I wouldn't call them. That if they didn't care enough to be there, I shouldn't care enough to chase after them. That lasted exactly 1 week. Then, against my better judgment, I called my mother. "Oh, Rebecca," she sighed as if I was being dramatic. "We never got an invitation." I blinked, stunned by the sheer audacity of the lie. "Mom, I sent you both physical and digital invites. I have the read receipts. I called you about it multiple times." "Well, I don't know what to tell you," she said airily. "We didn't receive anything." I clenched my jaw. "So you just assumed I would leave my own parents out of my wedding? You didn't think to ask? You didn't think to check?" "I don't appreciate your tone," she snapped. "We were deeply hurt that you excluded us from such an important event." I laughed bitterly. "That's funny, because Daniel heard you on the phone with Meline saying that this wasn't the plan." Silence. For the first time in my life, I felt something shift inside me. I had spent years trying to earn their approval, bending over backward to be noticed. But in that moment, I finally saw them for who they really were. It was never about forgetting to invite them. It was about Meline. It was about the fact that, in their eyes, I was never supposed to be first. I inhaled sharply. "You know what, Mom? You made your choice. And I'm done pretending it doesn't hurt." And for the first time in my life, I hung up on her. 2 months after my wedding, Meline got engaged. My parents were ecstatic. They announced it in the family group chat with exclamation points and heart emojis, boasting about the incredible man she was marrying. My mother, who had completely ignored my wedding planning, immediately threw herself into organizing Meline's. Within weeks, she had booked an upscale venue, arranged dress fittings at luxury boutiques, and sent out save-the-date cards in elegant gold envelopes. It was everything she had never done for me. At first, I told myself I didn't care. That I was done expecting anything from them. But then the calls started. One evening, as Daniel and I were watching TV, my phone rang. It was my mother. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity won. "Rebecca," she said, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." I already knew where this was going. "Your aunt told me that several family members are saying they don't want to attend Meline's wedding. And when I asked why, do you know what they said?" I said nothing, letting her dig her own grave. "They said it's because of you," she continued, her tone sharpening. "Because of the things you've been telling people. I can't believe you would be so petty as to try to ruin your sister's special day." I blinked. "Excuse me. You've been spreading lies about us," she accused. "Telling people we intentionally skipped your wedding. And now your poor sister is suffering because of it." I scoffed. "Mom, I haven't spread anything. I told the truth. And if people don't want to attend Meline's wedding because of how you treated me, maybe that's something you should reflect on." She gasped, as if I had slapped her. "So you admit it? You're doing this to punish us?" I let out a humorless laugh. "No, Mom. You did this to yourselves." Before she could argue, I hung up. I wasn't playing their game anymore. The next time I visited my aunt, she sighed and gave me a knowing look. "You know, Rebecca," she said, pouring me a cup of tea, "we always saw what was happening. We just didn't say anything because, well, what could we do?" I looked at her surprised. "You mean the favoritism?" She nodded. "It wasn't just you. Everyone noticed. But your parents were so determined to maintain their perfect family image that no one wanted to challenge them." I swallowed hard. "So why are people suddenly pulling away now?" She hesitated, then said, "Because you stopped taking it. And that made people realize how unfair it really was." I sat there stunned. For years, I had thought that keeping quiet was the best way to survive. That if I just endured it, things would get better. But standing up for myself had done what silence never could. It exposed the truth. A week after my mother's phone call, I got a text from Meline. Meline, we need to talk. Face to face. I ignored it. I had no interest in whatever guilt trip she was about to pull. Then came another text. Meline, you're being really immature about this, Rebecca. You've already had your wedding. Why are you trying to ruin mine? Ruin hers? I hadn't done a damn thing. Still, I had no intention of meeting her in person. I wasn't going to sit through another lecture about how I was the problem. But Meline had always been persistent. And when she didn't get a response from me, she found another target, Daniel. It was a Tuesday evening when Daniel came into the living room, phone in hand, an amused expression on his face. You're not going to believe this, he said, handing it to me. I took the phone and read the message. Meline, as Rebecca's husband, I hope you understand the importance of family. Right now, she's making reckless choices that are causing unnecessary damage. I'm reaching out to you because I believe you have the ability to talk sense into her. Please, help her understand that she's overreacting and that we should be working toward reconciliation instead of deepening this divide. It's in everyone's best interest, including yours. After all, good relationships with successful family members can open many doors. I nearly choked on my own laughter. She really just tried to bribe you with networking opportunities? I asked. Daniel smirked. I guess she thinks I'll care about whatever status she thinks she has. I shook my head in disbelief. It was almost sad. Meline had spent her entire life trying to control the narrative, and now that it was slipping through her fingers, she was scrambling. Daniel had already typed out a response. Daniel, thanks for your concern, Meline. But Rebecca doesn't need me to manage her decisions. She's more than capable of thinking for herself. If you have something to say to her, I suggest you do it directly. It was short, polite, dismissive. It was perfect. Meline's response was immediate. Meline, I see. She's already poisoned you against us. Don't say I didn't try to help. With that, I blocked her number. I wasn't doing this anymore. The last time I spoke to my parents, it was because they called me. Not to apologize, of course. To blame me one last time. My mother's voice was sharp, full of barely contained rage. Rebecca, you've done enough damage. Your sister is devastated, and now family members are refusing to attend her wedding because of the lies you've been spreading. Do you have any idea how selfish you're being? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Mom, I haven't lied about anything. You're turning people against us, she snapped. No, I said quietly. I just told them the truth. And if the truth makes you look bad, that's not my fault. There was silence on the other end. Then my father spoke for the first time. Well, he said, his voice cold. If you're so determined to make yourself the victim, then maybe it's best if we stop pretending to be a family. I felt something inside me crack, but not in the way it used to. It wasn't pain. It wasn't sadness. It was relief. Maybe you're right, I said. And then I hung up. And I didn't look back. In the days following that final call, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't weighed down by the endless, invisible burden of trying to earn my parents' love. I wasn't checking my phone, hoping for an apology that would never come. I wasn't twisting myself into knots wondering if I was being too sensitive or overreacting. I was done. And the best part? My life didn't fall apart without them. In fact, it got better. I focused on my marriage. Daniel and I spent lazy Sunday mornings drinking coffee on the balcony, making plans for our future. Plans that didn't include people who only saw me as an afterthought. I threw myself into my work, taking on new projects that excited me. Without the stress of my family weighing on me, I had more mental clarity than ever. I reconnected with family members who actually cared. Aunts and uncles who, now that I had spoken up, admitted they had seen the favoritism for years. You were always such a bright girl, Rebecca, one of my older cousins told me at a family gathering. It's a shame your parents never saw that. I shrugged. They only had eyes for Meline. She gave me a knowing look. And where has that gotten them? That's when I found out the real reason so many people were refusing to attend Meline's wedding. It wasn't because of me. It was because they finally saw my parents for who they were. The week before Meline's wedding, I got a text from my aunt. Aunt Carol, just a heads up, Your mom had a meltdown at brunch. Apparently, half of the extended family has convenient scheduling conflicts and won't be going to the wedding. I heard her ranting about how you ruined everything. Thought you'd like to know. I laughed out loud when I read it. Daniel glanced over. What's so funny? My mom's freaking out because people don't want to go to Meline's wedding, I said. And of course she thinks it's my fault. He smirked. Because taking accountability would be too hard. Exactly. From what I heard later, Meline's wedding was a disaster. A venue mix-up left them scrambling for a new location. The high-end boutique that was supposed to custom-make her dress? Unexpected delays. Some of the family members who had originally agreed to be part of the bridal party dropped out last minute. And when the big day finally arrived, the reception hall was half empty. I didn't gloat. Not really. But I won't lie, I felt vindicated. For years, my parents had worked so hard to maintain their perfect family image. But in the end, it wasn't me who ruined it. They did that all on their own. Months passed, and my life kept moving forward. My parents never reached out again. Meline tried once, sending a passive-aggressive email about how I had really shown my true colors, and that she pitied me for being so bitter. I didn't reply. Because I wasn't bitter. I was happy. And that was the best revenge I could have ever asked for. 1 year later, Daniel and I sat on our balcony, watching the sunset. Any regrets? He asked, squeezing my hand. I thought about it. About all the years I spent trying to make my parents love me the way they loved Meline. About the pain, the disappointment, the heartbreak. Then I thought about now. About the quiet peace in my heart, the love I had built for myself, the freedom of knowing I didn't have to prove my worth to anyone. No, I said. Not a single one. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't living in my sister's shadow. I was living for me.